Good day and welcome to yet another edition of Insight. You know, there's always an inquiry going on. Inquiry, whatever you want it to be. But certainly the Jamaica Constabulary Force is always deserving of one. It should be an everyday inquiry as far as I'm concerned, because it has to do with making contact with people, and things are changing, the culture is changing, and so therefore we are having our own inquiry this morning. So we have decided to bring together two persons who have served the force and combined over 80 years of service. We're talking about Leon Rose, the gentleman in the jacket. ACP retired. Michael James, SSP retired. And what retired means for this program is that they're unmuzzled. They are now free to give their own thoughts and own views without anybody calling them up and saying, I'm going to post you somewhere else, or you'll be in charge of something else. So we're all free here. Stay with us. Policing now, and we've just come out of a situation where we've seen some footage, if you may, of the police in Denham Town, and the Prime Minister raising the ante, of course, in Parliament, about that's not the way to go. And gentlemen, and I'll start with, you know, we'll have to still obey a rank with this thing. All right, we'll go to the rank, Michael. We'll go to the rank. Your assessment from where you're pulled back, give me your sense of where you spend so much of your life. Give me your assessment of it as an opening statement, as a what can we do to fix this?
Thank you very much, Michael, and good morning to our viewers. The fact of the matter is that the first thing we have to understand is that policing is a dynamic process. What happens yesterday is not likely to happen today. And so as the science of policing evolve, it is inclusive of human behavior and other factors. The practitioners of the craft now, which is us, the police, have to understand that if the maxim of yesteryear was that policing with consent has to be the option, it is even more pertinent today that you have to police with the consent of the citizenry. And particularly in this new, what you call information age, it makes it even more pertinent. I'm afraid if you look across the world, police inactions and police misconduct sometimes are no longer hidden under there, because there is always a hidden camera somewhere to record your activities. And so for me, I feel that professionalism has to be a factor that is drilled in to the practitioners of the craft. And remember, we have to police with consent.
Yes. SSP, retired, unmuzzled. Where you sit, how you see it, are you troubled by it?
Let me just remind you that, and I should say, I speak on both of us, that our career has been one that, based on the different areas that we have been, we are two persons who were never muzzled by the organization.
Indeed. Yes, one was...
So when it was in representation at the federation level of the officer corps level, both of us served as a leadership in the Police Officers Association. So we know what it is to speak our truth. And that's all we were always careful about, making sure that we speak our truth. But yes, the dynamics of policing has changed. Professionalism, not only in theory but in action, is that which every time the member goes out there and is interacting, ought to be in the fore of his or her mind that he or she is always under the scrutiny of a very critical public, and therefore has to be assured that knowledge of the profession, knowledge of what the individual is doing, that you're always right because your action is going to be always called upon in relation to accountability.
It's the issue of social media. ACP retired. Do you believe that the force has taken that under serious advisement in terms of the curriculum, in terms of preparing them to be professional, to quote you? Have we not seen too many disturbing signs through these videos that go viral?
I know of a fact, Michael, that because I used to be in training, and as my colleague, Mr. James have said, we would have served at various levels of command. And therefore, even before you had this whole infusion of the relevant technology, the phone, the iPhone, and all the different ones, as leaders, we found it necessary from time to time to indicate our charges, how you must conduct yourself in the discharge of your duties. And so whether or not there was a device to record you or not, understand that the rights of the citizenry is always important. Offenses are not committed against the police force. Offenses are committed against the state. And just as how we, as police officers, whether or not those offenses are committed on view, which means we can take an immediate action, or is as a result of a report that is made, you investigate. And if the evidence you gathered so far requires you to take whatever the action is, then you take that action recognizing that you are a servant of the state and that offenses are not committed against you.
That's easier said than done. I put it to you, SSP retired. I like the retired. So it flows nicely. I put it to you though, that while that is in essence the way to go, that it's not personal, but when a man tell you things, the public is assuming too much, that somehow the police officer who comes on the scene is without blood, without flesh, without heart, and without feelings, that he can't react, he shouldn't react because he's so well trained. Rubbish, isn't that so?
Again, if there is, and there's expected to be leadership on the ground, one would take it for granted that the more senior you are, is the fact that you have been exposed to training to give leadership to your charge. And therefore, at all times, it is requisite that, as best as is possible, that there is leadership on the ground to deal with situations. And therefore, a number of times these incidents escalate. And it is this sort of a situation whereby the senior person there ought to recognize and take charge to prevent any escalation. Because we're a verbose society. And, you know, when the arguments start, if the law enforcement officer, if the policeman, who's taught and trained to be cool, calm, and intrepid, loses that and start that verbal tirade with the members of the community, many times the individual will lose it.
Because one is more decked out with more deadly equipment.
On the other hand, you did raise an important point, Michael. Police officers also are human beings.
Yes.
And they do react to situation. They empathize, and sometimes dependent on a particular crime and the scene of that crime. Policing is also is also driven by passion and empathy. And there are times when you might be called to a crime scene. You feel very much
Internalize,
the pain,
yeah,
and
internalize
it.
what you see out
You
there.
understand?
On personal.
So a society also have to recognize that it's not heartless all the time. Police also have passion and empathy.
Yes. But you see, when you're out there and when the cops are out there and a young man tell you about part of your mother's anatomy you must go and deal with, you're not going to be thinking, oh, that's words against the state. That's words against me. And you disrespect the state by telling me.
It is very difficult at times, all of us. But you see, once we take on a particular profession, there's certain expectation. And unfortunately, as police officers, the bar is set very high. And one of those high bars, how to be tolerant, is what to expect from an indisciplined society. Because we can't react to indiscipline with indiscipline. It's a very difficult call.
But I put it to you that the police who joined the force did not come from Mars. They came from the same society.
Absolutely.
Again, I don't know, I'm not too sure to the extent that, because that same scenario that you're speaking to, during my training, I was exposed to that hardening, as we'd want to call it, because your instructors would have literally said things to you that by virtue of where you are and where they are, you could not respond. And therefore, they were preparing you to deal with that situation in the public. I know that there have been times when recruits have argued that they are being abused, verbal abuse, but in our time we
part
saw
of the
that
preparation.
part of preparing you to deal with the realities you'll face when you go out there.
One of the realities I have to face is that I have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back and deal with whether or not the expectations are realistic. We'll be right back on Insight. Welcome back to Insight. The inquiry into the JCF is on, and it's on JNN. One of the things I put to you, ACP Rose and my brother Miguel, Michael James, is that there was a time when the training period was longer. It was cut back, wasn't it?
There was a time that
it was longer. And I recall at the time when the proposal was made to cut it back, and then came the cut, that we're saying, be careful we do not reap the whirlwind on this, because if we do not spend enough time with the training, especially in a society that is a little coarse.
Yes.
Yes? And if we give up on the training, we are going to get it in the back end. ACP Rose, true or false?
There is no question that training has to be not only a continuous process, but look at policing. When you're being introduced to the science and the craft itself, you can't shorten that. You can't do that. And yes, there was a time when some policy decisions were taken that, you know, 4 months, I think, would have been sufficient, coupled with on-the-job training, and there was contemplation that you could do on other aspects via the internet and things like that. But I was one who was never of that view, because when you're going into something, you have to look at the whole picture, the broader picture. You have to look at the present nature of your society and make some determinants. Does residency in training, what does it provide? A longer period, particularly taking somebody out of an environment.
Yes.
It means, my own personal view is that it takes a period of residency to re-socialize that individual from whence he or she came, and to socialize them to a new environment. What are the constitutional provisions? What up in terms of human rights, the dignity of people, your own human rights? Because as I said earlier, policing is a tough call. And so, yes, I have to agree with the statement, but at the same time too, it does not mean that on-the-job training was not an important factor.
Yes.
And to get back to what my brother colleague here have said, is that it behoves leadership at various levels to ensure that by their own training, their own period of management and leadership, that they have a responsibility to see that the young officers are properly groomed.
Yes.
I think part of the, just what I want to follow up, a part of the, what I call the failure of the on-the-job training is the inability of the organization at the time when it came on. When these probationers went into the division to finish their probationary period, they were supposed to be assigned to mentors.
Yes.
No, because of the continuous shortage of manpower, 9 out of 10 times, when they go to a division, they get lost. They now become their own mentor because there is not a sufficiency of manpower out there to ensure that each time this probationer is working with his or her mentor. Many times that probationer, as soon as he or she gets out there, they are sent to different formations without the level of mentorship. And so they do not benefit from what was expected.
Would you agree that we need to spend some more time with training, especially under this new environment, social media, how you relate to people, and using that to the good of the police force as well, because it's not something that's negative. I recall 2 things that stays in my mind as it relates to social media. Christiana, the busman and the police, yes, and what was said before, and then you saw what you saw. I recall the first time we saw social media, one of the first time was a policeman in Ocherius on the plaza with a man with a stone, and most people would not have seen that that report being outside of that. Yes, so it's not something to fear, mark you, but at the same time I'm wondering if the training is taking into account the human rights and whether or not you are always under scrutiny. So you need to step up your game.
I can attest to that yes, it is, and it has been. But training has to be deliberate in terms of what you need it. So from time to time you look at your curriculum. There are some core areas and core subjects that has to be taught. But at the same time, you would have to look at the new dynamics and ensure that the recruits are trained in this particular regard. Some have to be done at the training environment, whilst others are done on the job and things like that. But a quick little point here, Michael. We must remember also, that the society is becoming coarser and tougher to police. Young police officers sometimes, and society hardly knows this, some of them work 18 hours per day, sometimes 24 hours per day. It is a stressful job. It is a tough call. The society, crime and violence is in essence, and the behavior of the society is not reducing. The discipline is growing more and more. And this is the environment that you're being asked to police.
Michael James, how many persons know that when you come and tell a policeman about his mother, him is coming off a 17-hour work shift and it's like he's not the man you play with?
They don't do what they don't care.
Yes. Right? And this is not a justification, but we need to understand this.
No, you've got something here that I never considered in terms of SOE and ZOZOs now, and the long term and the quick turnaround that you need to get back to the job.
You will recall, you see, and that is one aspect of the issue, because the policeman who leaves a home environment, his own environment, and his economic environment is not one that sets him off with a frame of mind to go and deal with issues. Is a time bomb. And so therefore, you see, we are looking at the outcome, but sometimes we have to look at what contributes to that.
Yes.
What is the individual, personal, or how has the state prepared that individual in terms of, is he economically stable in terms to go and do policing the stressful environment? He goes out there and school fees, rent, and all those things are factors in his mind because he is in receipt of remuneration that is not taking care of the basics?
Yes, but I hear you still making the case as a POA and Federation man, and I understand that. But the part, one can always argue that that's what you signed up for, you agreed you signed that. But the part that I suspect you did not sign up for, which could implicate you in some snap decisions, is the amount of man hours, woman hours, person hours that you're putting in.
Yes.
And it is shortening you.
It is. It is. It is short in Michael. Another perspective that one also have to look at in looking at the environment that you're being asked to police. How is the state preparing the society in terms of values and attitude and their own responsibility? People talk about rights, I have rights, I have rights. But right comes with responsibilities. And that is an important factor that the society needs to understand. Yes, I have a right to listen to my music. But do I have a right to be driving on the road and have a box and it's disturbing other people, the volume of the music gone up? So I have a responsibility to ensure that that music is tolerated by me. Other persons that sometimes doesn't want to hear that type of music. You understand? The country, the society provides in communities some social public good. And so you might have a community center. It is there for the citizenry. What is the responsibility of the citizens? Is to ensure that it is properly maintained, that it is not vandalized. That is a responsibility. Parents, finally. Parents have a responsibility in the growth and development of their children. You have the right, of course, to have your children, but where's the responsibility to bring them up?
Yes. Segue for me into Noise Abatement Act, Michael James. Segue into that.
There has been a lot of discussions about having appropriate amendments. Because on the one hand, every person needs to have that right of peace within certain permit, right? But there is also another factor. There's an economic factor, whereby, and there's also what is known as a class factor that impacts law enforcement. Because depending on where and depending on who, and then the police get thrown in the mix.
Yes.
And so you will always hear the discussion that John Brown is able to have his or her event until 7 a.m., yet mine is terminated at 12 midnight.
Yes. And then when you go on some of these scenes, you see a letter from a minister of government asking for an extension. That has got to be the biggest
And that is where I say the amendment needs to come appropriately. The question of declaring some areas for entertainment, so that the time factors in areas which do not impact on the citizens in that sense. So that needs to be looked at.
Yes, indeed. And what needs to be looked at is another break from Insight. And we'll be right back to find out more about the policing now, then, and in the future. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Insight. They have over 80 years between them, and we have the privilege of picking their brains as it relates to policing now, and then certainly going to get into then, and more, and most importantly, the future of policing in Jamaica. We're talking about our special guest, Leon Rose, ACP retired, and Michael James, SSP retired, and we're getting the benefit of their brains. One of the recent commotions in the society was the issue of corruption. And one of the areas that the police force has always been attacked about is corruption. That it is a corrupt force. How do the police deal with the issue now, then, and in the future of corruption outside of themselves and inside of themselves? ACP.
Michael, I know that within the police force, that there are mechanisms to deal with corruption. In fact, not only is there legislative provision, but there are regulations that deals with that. And it is one of those institutions of the state that has ready mechanisms to respond to these sort of challenges. Have there been corruption? Of course, no one could deny that there have been misconduct by some officers. And once properly investigated, they have suffered sanctions. And we have a thing in the force, at the time, it still is, known as the force orders. Sometimes, if it was a privilege for the society to see, they would have seen every week how many police officers have been disciplined as a result of it. Okay. But on the other hand, my concern is that here is a society where we know that there are some elements in this society who on the face of it appears to be so virtuous. And we well know that they are many times behind the level of corruption in this society. And the police knows this. And society knows this. And sometimes, for those of us who police some hard inner city communities in our time, when you go inside here, a lot of people don't even understand this. That people look at you and say, boss, you don't know who they down here. I don't know who in a data who do this or who give you this. They tell you. And these are some of the persons who operate as voices of conscience in our society. They have no such moral authority. It is only that it has not come out.
And difficult to come out? Why?
Well, you see, it is so easy to beat upon the police and to identify us. And sometimes when it does come out in other areas, it's because it reaches that stage where it could never no longer be hidden.
Yes. Mr. James.
You see, there was a time, when the police force was the only agency responsible to deal with corruption. Other agencies have been born, going over a decade, and we have not yet been made aware of one incident of corruption that they have sought to bring before the justice system. And then have we ever stopped to ask ourselves why?
Yes.
All civil servants and public servants are required by virtue of the Corruption Prevention Act. And are we saying that when you go through the thousands, everybody is spick and span? There's nobody that needs to be brought. The only person who are brought sometimes before the court is the policeman who has failed to file a return. And none of those returns have ever been, all those who have made those returns, they have found way to make the return appears to be above board.
And well after the time.
in a public service of over 100,000.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it not ironic?
Yeah.
Where have we ever seen it being publicized that individuals in other professions?
What I'm getting here is a case that says, listen, we have corruption in our house. Well, what about your house? How come we don't hear no smell? See no smell, hear no dog barking over your place?
And the police force has always, literally been the only organization that has always been doing its internal and self-cleansing.
Gentlemen, I can't escape this, and I'm glad you're all retired because unmuzzled, as I say. There is a feeling out there that the police goes out to embarrass people by turning up at their houses all kind of hours of the morning. And you want to embarrass people when you go out there. Is that a modus operandi of the police, that you go in some recent cases, that you go in the before dawn and do your raids, and is this a common practice?
Michael, that has never been a common practice. And I don't know about any common practice. What I know is that police officers in the discharge of their duty operationally has to be strategic. And so therefore, whenever time we go into an operation, it is based on the strategy that is likely to bring the desired results. It is ironic that sometimes when you go into the inner city communities and the poor man, and if you go there, you don't hear nothing about that. But when you go to other areas that appears to be untouchable, then you are hearing talks coming up. I don't buy that.
Because those are strategies
Before the law means all.
Yes.
I could help but chuckling because I have never heard them quarreling about when you go.
No, because you're not yet right. Those strategies are strategies the police has consistently used, depending on what the desired result you want.
Yes.
You go at the time that will give you the result less interaction with other members of the public, life, safety of the members, safety of the persons, all of those are factors that you'll factor in and say, what is the best time for us to go, whereby we can execute this
and even the
operation without any
even the
challenge.
reduction of the so-called drama. You pick your time strategically.
Yes, and you know they're home.
Yes.
They have not really gathered their mental thoughts together. And
Well-
the phone is not, you know,
People must
the best.
understand that there is not a self-interest in the police. The interest is the discharge of the responsibilities.
Yes.
Justice.
Help me. We have a juxtaposition here for you. In the 80s, we had the Suppressions of Crime Act. Now we're having a deluge of states of emergencies. And the idea is that it's impacting on the way things are policed. And therefore, the policeman in one instance, or in both instances, have this kind of a carte blanche where he can do what he wants because we have suspended the civil rights of society, and therefore they can move in, search as they want, and therefore that's not good policing because it stays too long. In the 80s, stays too long, and in this case, SOEs are a growing factor.
I think that there is no doubt that, for instance, the state of public emergency, as was perceived by the framers of the Constitution, was to respond to a crisis of imminent danger to the society. It was never meant to be a long-term effect, but it was like a shock and awe. So you come in and you get the desired result. You stabilize the situation, and then you return to the normal status to help you to police. But Michael, we are in extraordinary times in this country. We are policing a very hostile environment. And in those days, remember now, there is a whole plethora of crime that have come on the scene. For instance, look at scamming. On one hand, scamming is supposed to be a very technical offense. But what are its consequences? Some of the consequences and effect of scamming. That turns out to be violent. Because if you rob me, we conspire to do certain things. The money comes out.
No, sure.
And it was shared properly. You run a gun, then I go for your family. Those are the consequences of it.
And have the means to buy the gun.
And I have the means to buy the gun.
Yes.
I take a slightly different view. An emergency should mean an emergency. So there's no doubt that if the state is of the view that we need some other action, then the parliament needs to craft those actions. But those actions can't be the continuous use of the state of emergency that appears to normalize what was expected to be a short-term process. And therefore you may need some powers to be legislated. And then you have the state of emergency for really what a state of emergency is. Because it's really not having that shock and awe. So you may need aspects of it to treat with the challenges we're having in the crime and violence.
Yes.
So therefore legislate that which is needed to deal with that.
But I don't think we are short of legislation. In fact, everything that is happening in this country, the next thing you hear is legislation, legislation.
Yes, yes.
I don't think we are short of legislation. What I think we are short of, in my own view, is the will.
Well, they call it the ID, implementation deficit. we don't implement, we talk.
We just talk.
But help me with a situation here. I'm going to take a break. I'm told to take a break, but when I come back, I want you to consider this. The use of squads. The use of squads. Is it a matter that's now dead? Because I'm hearing some soundings from St. James. We'll be right back on Insight. Welcome back to Insight. Leon Rose, ACP retired, Michael James, SSP retired. Between them, over 80 years of service to the Jamaica Constabulary Force, and we are benefiting still from their brain power. One of the things that I've noticed, gentlemen, is that there is a resentment, a resistance to the use of special squads in the JCF. One that we have learned, a litany of squads have been over the years. Squads can never remain forever because they have a life cycle, like anything else. But I am hearing out of Montego Bay that pretty soon they will have a quick response team. Is that the making of a squad? And what are your impressions and positions about the use of squads in the JCF with the concern over the years of human rights abuses? How do you balance that out? Let me start with the SSP this time.
Every police service, police force, whether you want to call them squads, units, sections, team, well, depending on the challenges that they have in dealing with law enforcement, will have to put together specialized groups of individuals to carry out specialized functions. And so there is and will continue to be needs for specialized units given the challenges that we are facing. Properly trained, properly equipped, properly managed and accountable.
I can speak to one, the Special Anti-Crime Task Force, that when they went out there was a respect from the citizen that these guys don't come to play.
You're so right.
But what is happening now will bring out the soldiers.
You see, Michael, earlier when we speak about the emergency powers and the intention of it was shock and awe, short of that, every modern police force, as my colleague said, would have had some specialized unit. The mobile reserve, for instance, was designed to be that response unit to severe challenges in policing, public disorder, riots, and where crime might be overwhelming a society, a particular community.
Or division, yeah. Yes.
Or division. And so they were specially trained to deal with those sort of challenges. And equipped. Now, we have not reached a stage in this country just to have ordinary policing. We need complementary policing to augment the community-based policing. But you also need that other side of policing to respond to the hard criminal network.
Like the people who kill off 3 people in one neighborhood and then go back and kill the other one the next morning.
Precisely.
And you can't go in with a Bible.
How much you going with a Bible? How much you going with
You're going with the Bible only when there's a fear of God.
You see? Of course you're going with the Bible.
Only when there's a fear of God, because if there's not a fear of God, the Bible don't work.
Yes.
But I guess the point that we're trying to drive is that there's absolutely the need. And if you look back, you know, is that every time that you form a special unit in the Jamaica Constabulary Force to respond to the challenges, it has always had the desired effect. It is what needed to be done is that, and as you indicated, there must be some life
Yes.
to a life cycle because it can't go on forever.
No.
You understand? And I think that perhaps sometimes that's a weakness, one of the weaknesses.
And they wait until they fail.
Yes, they wait until they fail.
Meaningless.
Yes.
And it becomes
Nobody-
meaningless.
yes, right,
You
right.
understand? And so that's one of the things I believe
No
that
exit strategy out of
our new managers now in the system will have to, when they look at that, and policymakers. But what I hope our policymakers doesn't do is to emasculate a place like the Mobile Reserve.
Why?
Because the Mobile Reserve, when you look at its history, I do not believe, and I'm not only speaking because I was a former commander of the Mobile Reserve, but I know exactly the history, the concept of the Mobile Reserve.
Not overtaken by time?
The mobile, no. It couldn't. It cannot be overtaken by time because it's a strategic element of the JCF. In fact, you know, in modern societies, there's always a paramilitary arm of the force, SWAT team, some forces call it. The Mobile Reserve was specifically designed to do this. Now, if you find some challenges in the Mobile Reserve, then you deal with those challenges. And one of those challenges is not to talk about your disbanding. You talk about fear. There was a time when I was a youngster and you had even industrial disputes and riots and challenges in some community and you hear that the Mobile Reserve is coming.
Yes.
That in itself brings order and obedience to the rule of law.
And it doesn't mean that you have to go in and knock people over the head.
No, they usually
absolutely
never
not.
By the time they get there, people would understand the role and function of this elite group.
They're not
And
coming
so
to-
they start by themselves to be right. So there was not always a need for them to be active. And usually, when they are called, they are at a strategic point waiting.
Yeah.
Because I've had situation at divisional management that we're having problems on the ground. The team comes in and they are not deployed on the ground because the local police is there. But people know that they're out there. And so you control of the situation and treat with it.
And it is so hypocritical when we speak of these particular things because you know you have some what is known as spin-off effect, you know.
Yes.
And when you talk about you're going to disband the Mobile Reserve and all of that, understand the spin-off effect sometimes that it have on the society itself. What are we saying? That the society is now so ordered, so well disciplined, that the rule of law
Or to play the devil's advocate, are you overwhelmed?
or indeed.
Because you could run into a situation where this now work, well, I'll tear it down. And
So what you need to do is that from time to time you must look at your strategies, look at your units, look at how you can re-strategize, reorganize, retool,
yes.
and re-energize.
Yes, you are segueing straight nicely into what I want to get into now. Policing the future. Policing, what do you see in a structure, organizationally and otherwise, operationally, administratively, that you would, if the commissioner was here and his team and the policymakers are here, and between you over 80 years, give me some pointers, give our viewers some pointers where you think you would start looking at and trying to make some suggestions that we have to outfit this for policing in the future.
Technology has to be one of the driving factors. Most of the large cities in the world, aspect of law enforcement is driven by technology. We are short in terms of the manpower, and that is going to take some time to get to what is maybe a desirable manpower. But in the meantime, town centers, cities, in the cities, can, with technology, one individual could be able, by virtue of using technology, to cover in terms of monitoring an area and to use that same technology when crime or offenses are committed, to use that technology to zero down onto individual. So technology has to be one of the driving factors.
Yes. Every time I look on social media, I see you in some other parts of the world. Where have you gone that you think, hey, this is serious policing right here? Where have you seen this technology work?
I've seen in Dubai, you hardly see the policeman out there. But when you are interacting with the local, they know that almost everything that they do, they are under the view of law enforcement.
CCTV.
And therefore there is that inherent, they will conform because they're not looking for the policeman on the corner because they know that cameras are there. And once they break the law, they're not going to be just a few minutes from there, they are going to be pulled over.
Oh, so the technology is tied in.
I think that I'm agreeing with my colleague and friend, and I see that the force's response to the recognition that technology has to be one of the ingredients now in the new era of policing. But you not only must have the equipment, training is an imperative. Training is an imperative. So sometimes it's not really manpower. It is the other added aids to policing. And so that technology, cameras, is one of those aids. But you can't just have cameras in some communities. You have to have, there's a responsibility now of the state. Look at the amount of unstructured communities you have.
Oh, yes.
The road system, light, because road and light are critical. Most of our crimes, unfortunately, we know where they are committed, but they are committed in unstructured communities.
Yes.
What will be the response time of the police? So the state must now understand that part of the crime fighting mechanism is to look at how do you now deal with unstructured communities. Squatting has to be looked at as a feature of a new policing. And organize communities around that. The United Kingdom, I think, is a unique example of how camera works, how technology works. Because when you are in the UK, almost the entire city of London is covered. You understand? So wherever you go,
I hear the
camera follows you. You understand? So that is critical. I think that we have also to equip our managers a little bit more to the new dispensation of policing that you go forward. We also have to continue to look at our curriculum and make quite sure that the curriculum is deliverable within the present circumstances.
It's a whole lot of stuff. So like you have to retrain the trainers.
Yes, you have to retrain the trainers. You see, there are some core subjects, but then there are other things that you have to be looking at. So your curriculum has to be one of the factors.
Yes. I'm not going to leave out without saying, what does a retired SSP do? After you've retired, what do you do?
Give service to the community.
Give service to the community.
That's what I'm doing.
You're busy.
You're busy. Yeah,
Very. What does a retired SSP do?
ACP does, just as my brother, give service, give service to the community. But
do you see any way of you being pulled back to assist with the, not policing, but with the training of and the talking to, just as how you're talking to us here in TV Land?
I think that over the years, and I'm not here arguing for a post for Mr. James and myself, but one of the weaknesses of the organization, I think, over a period of time, is that it's the inability to utilize some retired persons that have demonstrated competencies and skills that could assist in its circumstances. I don't know for what reason, but it has always been. And I'm not saying it since I leave the force. When a man knows that a person is about to be retired, it's almost like a joy.
Yes.
Yes, but I'm so retired, or she's so retired from the system.
Not about what they can
And they say you have many police services, if the officer is retiring, the service fees that they can make some contribution. The policies are in place to make use of the experience and knowledge that is there.
You had just had the last word, and I want to thank you all so much for being a part of Insight. And of course, you join me in saying to Leon Rose, ACP retired, Michael James, SSP retired, thank you, gentlemen, for your service. Until then, Michael Sharp wishing you pleasant viewing.